Good morning. This is the EdTech Collab Gathering, and I'm Christine Reuter, and I'm here to introduce Kristin Ziemke and Don Goble. They will be talking about media literacy, analyze, evaluate, and create to read to the world. So I'm going to turn my screen over to them.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. Kristin Ziemke here, hanging out with you this morning from Chicago. I am thrilled that it's finally September and we are here with the Ed Collab Gathering Workshop number 1. Please be sure to share your feedback and any questions that you might have throughout the day using Twitter with the hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering. I am thrilled that my friend Don Goble is here with me today to talk a little bit about media literacy in the K-12 classroom. Don, do you want to go ahead and say hello?
Sure. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Kristin, I'm so excited to be here, especially anytime I get to talk about media literacy. It's like I'm on board, and let's talk about it. And particularly excited to partner with you because I think there's been such a disconnect between our two worlds, and we're going to clash them together, and we're going to talk about how everything is interconnected. And I can't think of a better person to talk about this subject than with you. So I'm ready to get started.
Awesome. Friends, please let us know if you have questions along the way. We're going to try to make some time at the end to answer them. But I think what I love about this day and this event is this is the true synthesis of building your PLN, right? You have the opportunity to connect with people around the world, getting new and different inputs. I think, Don and I connected through the Apple Distinguished Educator Program, and I've found that even as a high school teacher, I continue to learn so much from the work that he does with kids. And as we were talking, we really realized, whoa, what you're doing with, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders is very similar to what we're doing with primary age learners, only it cycles down in depth and breadth. And so as you hang out in the gathering today, look for people, not just those other 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade teachers, but those people maybe outside your grade range that you can learn something from. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to switch over here, and we're going to talk just a little bit and share some examples of some practices from our classroom. This piece of media literacy, I think, is critically important because our kids are exposed to it, before they ever even enter school. This is a picture of my class that I worked with last year, and it was the last day of school, and these kids live in a high needs area. There has been quite a bit of flux in education in Chicago over the last few years, and so as the school year winds down, that becomes a significant time of transition for kids. What will we do over summer? Will we be safe? How will I see my friends? Will my teachers, my principal, my network at school be back the following year? And so as we were wrapping up the end of the year, it was the last day, and a number of kids started to get a little bit sad about the end of school. And then one person started crying, and as often happens in the elementary classroom, there was a little bit of that trickle-down effect. Before I knew it, 12 people were crying, and then 22 people were crying. And I tried to talk them through and say, guys, it's okay. I'm going to see you next year. We're all going to be back. We can stay in contact all summer using our blog, or your parents can tweet our class account. And nothing was doing the trick to get them back to a healthy social emotional state until I said, hey, everybody, let's take a selfie. And as soon as I said those words, immediately kids responded in a positive fashion. They put on their smiles, stopped their tears, and posed for the camera, as you can see right here. And so I think that's a piece. When I first started learning from Renee Hobbs a number of years ago, she talks so much about kids come in media aware, that they're already out there. They're using these tools and making judgments and ideas based upon that, and it's our responsibility to really guide them in a direction that allows them to evaluate, to know what the purpose is, to not only interpret, but more importantly, to start creating some of their own messages. And so they're there, and now it's our opportunity to teach them.
And guess what, though, Kristin? Guess what we don't do? We don't consistently teach kids about these messages. And let me throw a couple of stats out at you that will just really explain where my passion comes from in order to educate our kids, no matter the age. 90% of information transmitted to the brain is visual. And visuals are processed 60,000 times faster in the brain than text. So when I hear stats like that, it just makes me wonder. I get so curious, and then in some cases just really adamant about why don't we place more value on teaching the visual literacies that our kids are exposed to every single day, whether it's through informational, educational text or visuals at school, to the 4.5 hours of leisure time that we spend on average looking at a screen. And we just simply don't value that kind of education. We just assume that, oh, we'll just go ahead and watch. It's all just for entertainment sake. And here's my problem with that. You know, kids are learning about the world around them by the screens that they're looking at. And I think we miss a real opportunity to talk to them about the politics they see on the news, the tragedy and the craziness in the media that they see, the sensationalism, the sex, the drugs, the everything else they learn about, these bizarre things, to the tiniest little things of just perceptions of women, to perceptions of ourselves. You know, these are messages that are conveyed every single day through our screens, and yet we don't talk about them in a context in a way that's educational in our school environment. And so I think we missed that opportunity, and so that's why I'm excited to try to talk to you here and pair that. So if we want to move to the very next slide, we can talk a little bit about, you know, what it is that I do and why. And so as I just mentioned, I think the #1 skill not consistently taught in schools is media literacy. Now let me preface that. In schools, when media literacy is covered, it's typically through consumption. So maybe there is a class, current events, that may watch the news, that may read magazine articles. Ultimately, they're only consuming that information. And then they talk about it, they critically analyze it. That's a fantastic thing to do. On the flip side of that, though, what I have found in my time in education, this is my 11th year, is that students don't truly understand or learn until they are able to create the media messages themselves. And so once they're able to create the media message on their own, and they're asked to implement some of the techniques and philosophies and theories that are a part of the media, they suddenly begin to deeply understand the messages that are sent to them every single day. But it's through this creation where it happens. So if we move along to the next slide, here are the 5 key questions of media literacy from the Center of Media Literacy. Now, when we look at these, we can certainly look at these through consumption of what I just mentioned, of political advertisements, magazines, the news, any kind of entertainment, film, television. But I ask my students to ask themselves these questions before they create their own media. And that's what we do. We create multimedia journalism stories. We create promotional videos, public service announcements. We do some short cinematic narrative films, some documentaries. But before we even get into any of that production, and we'll talk later how that enhances writing, we have to ask ourselves this question, because we need to know who our audience is. And that's a big, big deal for our kids. So who created the message? So when our students are creating the message, they are the ones who are creating it. They can answer that with themselves, #1. And if you think about that and we process these questions a little bit further, my experience is different than yours, Kristin, and different than many of our audience. And so our students are aware of that as well. They have come from a different background, culture, morals, and values. So then we start talking about what kind of creative techniques are used to get and attract my attention. We start talking about sound, music, color, lighting, all editing, all these different types of techniques that are used to manipulate our thought process. And I'll get more to that in a minute. The third one is, how might different people understand this message differently than me? So that comes back to understanding that we're all very different and we all come from very different cultures. Now, I could have my students create videos for my audience here of my high school, which is about 1,300 in a public high school. It ranges in diversity. Instead, though, I encourage my students to look at their world and be able to create a message that is diverse enough to attract and interest and engage the viewers for you, Kristin, in Chicago. Also engage the viewers in Baltimore or California or Australia. I mean, we really reach out to the world, and I want to understand these different cultures and how those messages might come across to them. The fourth one, what values, lifestyles, points of view are represented in or omitted from this message? And I really want to focus on that last one just for a second, or omitted from the message. And I think it's funny because, and I say that word, my students, when they want to make videos, and when I see a lot of students making videos in school, it's the humorous type. They want to do a rap video to a math song, or they want to do a, some kind of, silly flash mob dance, and they think that's the kind of video that they're doing, and or they might want to do some kind of silly video walking through the halls talking to their friends. And what I tell my kids is, what's funny to you is probably not funny to anybody else, because the reality is that there's a message potentially that we're omitting that could be offensive, could be distracting, could be there's disrespectful. There's a lot of different words you could attach to that. And then the last one, why is this message being sent? Why are we doing this? Now, in my class, I have a lot of students or teachers say, well, Don, you're having your kids create video. You're journalists. That's what they do. That's why they're sending their message. But the reality is, well, my kids are going into your class, into your social studies class, into your English class, and you have a lot of presentations, visual presentations, culminating activities that you might be presenting in your class. Why are you sending those messages? And maybe there's a visual representation that my students could create that is related to your content. And so that's been my drive to really push the video production process, the creation of student media into other subjects, because there's a definite overlap there.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important piece. The layers that we need to teach about this, right? It's not just about viewing, right? We talk a lot about this in the primary grades. When you view media with the intent to learn, it's not like when you lay on the couch and watch Frozen. You're not chowing down on a bowl of popcorn, but instead you're going through a strategic, well thought out process in order to learn or gain new knowledge from that media that you view. And so we give kids a lot of the parallel structures that we use with reading text and reading print to track, to archive, to use that information at a later point in time. And so I think the word is intentional. And I think a lot of this goes back for me to some of Dr. Gupta from Microsoft work, as well as the law of amplification, right? Media and technology doesn't necessarily change how people learn. It just gives us another opportunity to learn it in a different way, to go deeper, to think a little bit bigger. And so as we go about this piece, we do what makes sense for our kids. We recognize that, yes, there are messages, there are pieces omitted, there's bias going into it, and we use that Colleen Beer's language of notice and note. We first make them aware of what it is, and then we give them a name for it so that later on down the road, when they see that again, they can have conversations about it and add to the thinking.
Absolutely. If we could, I would like to move into the next slide, because when we talk about, Kristin, now that we're all these multiple layers, and our students, excuse me, as our students as creators, suddenly there's some impact to that, right? And so it's not only just the creation piece. I love talking then about the impact and what that impact means through their media message, because it's one thing just to create, and we're not talking about that, right? We're not talking about just using technology and iPad and whatever device you have to create a video because it's accessible and it's easy and it's there. Sure, that's cool, but let's talk about the impact. And so these are the messages. Once my students now start consuming their own media, and they understand that all media messages are constructed. When I tell them that everything that is created through the media is with intention, that there's nothing like that happens by accident unless you're reporting breaking news, that everything is intentional. And so when I have them create their own projects, I ask them, why did you make that choice? Why did you select that color? Why did you put the text there on the screen? Why did you interview that person? They start to realize they have to make some really creative choices, and they have to be able to justify the different reasons for why they're making those choices. Could we go back to that slide real quick for one more second? I'm sorry.
Yep.
As I clear my throat. As we go back into then everything that the language that media uses, the creative language, it has its own rules, that different people experience the same message differently, and that goes back to having the different values, right, that we talked about, the 5 key questions, that the media messages can be viewed differently, and we have to be careful. What might that mean? That media have embedded values and points of view, which in my opinion means agenda. You know, if you watch CNN, boy, CNN is making a ton of money on Donald Trump right now, right? I tweeted out the other day that 5 of the top 10 stories of CNN on their website had something to do with Donald Trump, and not all of it was newsworthy. In fact, 4 of the 5, if in my opinion, were opinionated. And in fact, there was, after the Republican debate the other night, there was an article on CNN. It wasn't really even an article, but it was a compilation of GIFs. They took the most interesting facial expressions of the candidates from the debate, and they mashed it together. Now, what do you think? What kind of message are they trying to send to you when they show one candidate who looks very serious and stern, maybe very presidential, and another one making faces like they're a complete buffoon? So what does that potentially tell us when we're reading those messages? And that most media messages then, and this is the one that kids never really truly understand until we talk about it, the message that's created, gain for profit or for power. You know, that's how film and television and radio and media makes their money through advertisements. And when students truly understand then, well, okay, so if they're making, maybe it's not quite as authentic or genuine as we like to believe, and that a choice is being made in order to make money or to set an agenda, you know, right? Like Fox or CNN and MSNBC, politically, who are they most interested in? So I just find, you know, those core concepts very interesting when we share those messages with our kids and they understand the power that's behind the words and the visuals that they're creating. There's suddenly such a deeper impact and a deeper thought, right? That they're suddenly now, they're asked to critically think about. And I just find that it's much more engaging and a deeper set of learning.
Well, and I think it's just that piece of raising awareness, too.
Right.
You know, like, kids don't even really know what they're interested in always until we put something in front of them and say, hey, have you ever thought about this? What do you know about this? Where do you see this in their life? And it's that spark of curiosity that gives learners passion. It's also that purpose piece, you know, really understanding the why that comes behind what we're doing and how we're applying that in our day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
I think this is something that we've learned as teachers of reading across the years as well, right? Like, for so long we've talked to kids about look for the words in bold print, you know, read the graph, look for the cross-section, but we never, or fail to always, maybe I should say, articulate the purpose of that. You know, why do you read the words in bold? Well, because that's a keyword that the author wants you to know. Why do you look at the cross-section? What does that tell you? And so giving them the purpose behind it, I think, is really important, and it becomes more of an active role, which we know when kids are doing the work, they're understanding, remembering, and down the road using that information so much more.
Definitely. I think it's interesting, too, that at least with my class, so I teach high school, and so my kids come in freshman through senior. I get them all, and I think this might connect and segue nicely into what we're going to talk about next. What you're going to bring up next is that, you know, they come into my class, they're like, what? And I ask them, why are you taking this class? Many of them just for credit. You know, they need the practical art credit, but some of them will say, well, because I don't like to write. you're a video class, so I'm going to do stuff with video. And I tell them, you know what, well, you have two choices. Either one, that you need to change that frame of mind, or you need to find another class, because in fact, the writing that is done in this class is enormous. It might be a different kind of writing that you're used to, but what I found, and especially in collaborating and talking with you, Kristin, and with other educators from all different grade levels, it's amazing how much of a connection there really is. The amount of writing that we do, the importance of the writing. I always tell them, any good television show, any good video, any good film, it starts with the writing, and it starts with the planning and the storyboarding and the drawings. And if none of that comes through and none of that is any good, the ultimate product isn't going to be very good. So we've got to start right there. And I know you have some things you wanted to show that really, it kind of enhances that, right? It's really partnering the text with the visual to show the importance and the impact.
Absolutely, and I think what you just said was something that I really keyed in, that piece of the visual. You know, I think as elementary teachers, we've known forever and ever the power of the picture book, right, and how important illustrations are to connecting kids to pieces of text. And I think one of the reasons that we go deeper and teach this even better than we've done before is that we're giving our kids lots of new entry points to think about visuals. We're also helping them create that mental image or that picture or movie in their mind that helps them understand more. And so it's kind of like that constant handball game back and forth where we're saying, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. But we're giving them as many inputs as possible in order to build the thinking piece. And that's something that we have to be aware of as educators. You know, I've been working this past year on my new book with Katie Mutaris, Amplify, which will be out next month. It's very exciting. And we've written a lot about like this media piece and reading information that comes online. And one of the things that we've identified are some shifts that are happening right now in literacy. So just, you know, humor me for a couple seconds and think about the last website that maybe you opened as a grown-up, right? Like before you got on the EdCollab gathering, did you check the scores on ESPN? Did you take a look at CNN, like Don said, to see what Donald Trump is doing? Or maybe, you know, look at the weekend weather. Think about what popped up first on whatever website you opened most recently. And I think that's a big piece. You know, what we're seeing, and I'm just going to show you a quick visual here. I went to a couple of my favorite websites on Monday as Don and I were planning and taking a look at this. And so when I opened these sites on Monday, these are the first pieces that pulled up. And so you can see I just took a couple of screenshots. On the right there, ESPN, at the bottom, CNN, and BBC up there at the top. But every one of these websites opened first with images or a video. And if you look and identify, especially on that larger screenshot from ESPN on the right, the balance between visual and print on the web page is pretty significant, I think. You know, if you look at the tennis stats, right, there's one sentence giving a preview, but reliance on the image to really communicate the message of what's going to be found in that article or in that little clip. And so we're seeing, you know, like this big shift in text versus visual, and we're noticing that in our grown-up life. We're also noticing this in the life of our students. And so as this changes, it's our best course of action as educators to be really aware of this and to start thinking about these pieces. Thoughts on that, Don?
Yeah, please leave that slide up. I have so many thoughts on this when I look at it. The first is, I can't remember the exact study. I'll try to find it and tweet it out later, but as we ask our kids to read digitally, when they open up the iPad, just like you mentioned, or whatever device they have, 75% of what you're finding on a digital page is visual compared to text. That's a big deal, right? Because when we open up a book in our classroom, it's probably 90% or more text. than it is to visual, especially, some books might be 100% text. And so it's a different form of reading. And what do I mean by that? All right, well, let's look at that BBC image up there. And the headline, Egyptian forces kill Mexican tourists. As I look at that image, I see something that looks kind of scary. There's a soldier there holding his gun out over the open Jeep, ready to shoot anybody that might come in his way. To me, that's a frightful picture. But then it's got the flag hanging to the back of the Jeep, almost in celebration or to show how powerful they are. And if you also notice, the image is canted, meaning it's tilted. See how it's kind of tilted to the right, which suggests that there's some kind of disruption or distortion happening. So through that image, it's enhancing the words, it's enhancing the text. And and although the caption says Egyptian security forces mistakenly killed 12 people, the headline does not suggest that. And look at the headline, white, big, bold print. Forces kill Mexican tourists. Like, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't go to Mexico and be a tourist. It's very disturbing. Now look down to the thousands flee wildfires. And you see this enormous fire in the background with this dark shadow in the foreground of a fireman who looks like he's almost leaving the scene, doesn't it? It looks like he's leaving to the right while the fire is to the left. I don't know, there's a lot that could be interpreted there. Is he leaving the scene? Is he fleeing? Is it too large to defeat? How scared should we be? There's so many images there that are disturbing, but if we don't understand how to read those, it can, we're suddenly building judgments and opinions in our mind, whether we're communicating them or not. And I think it's really important to communicate those verbally, especially with our students.
Well, and I think the whole purpose, right, is that piece of thinking, right? We're teaching kids how to think effectively about whatever text we put in front of them. And I think it goes back to expanding the definition of what it means to read. How are you reading an image? How are you reading a video? What is a piece of text that can guide you in thinking differently? And so as I've thought about this over, the course of the last couple of years, I think there's a couple big shifts in literacy right now. And it's not that we're abandoning the old practices, we're just recognizing that some things are changing, and so we have to add to our instructional repertoire, right? We're still pairing text and tech. We're still pairing text and images just like we've always done. And now that image might be online. But I think being aware is the first line of being proactive for our learners. And so a couple of these shifts, that we're seeing, Don was talking about this piece of, if you look at the right there, images and videos comprising about 75% of what's on a website, right? Now, think of the power of infographics in the last 18 months and how often we're seeing those in our lives, right? I travel a lot, and so every time I'm at a hotel, I'm looking at USA Today because each section of the newspaper at the bottom left now contains a daily infographic. And so we have to explicitly teach kids how to read these pieces effectively, how to think about them, and then move into that piece of how to create your own media messages with a purpose to learn something new or to share information. Much of this writing piece that Don talked about just a little bit ago, we see flourish in the area of micro writing, right? It no longer has to be that 6-paragraph essay, but instead can be a tweet, right? A blog post, a caption, and Don's going to talk a little bit more about that later, but I think the layered elements of summary and synthesis that comes in with micro-writing is hugely significant. It's way harder to write something succinctly and short than it is to blather on and get your idea across a couple pages, right? And so we've got all of these new pieces and elements that we're we're thinking about. We're looking for entry points for learners. Yes, we're still using text in the classroom, but now kids can enter through a video, through an image, build background knowledge, and then the text has more relevancy. It's accessible for all too, and I think that accessibility piece is a huge thing. How can we build thinking and use student comprehension as that carrot on a stick model to guide learners to become better decoders and better readers? And so I just have a couple examples I want to talk through quickly. You know, we're talking about media, and I want to make it very clear that media doesn't always have to be something with technology, right? This is a practice that we've been using for a number of years, having kids read images and annotate their thinking, right? This is a first grade sample of this student reading this image of a gorilla, and you can see here she tracks her new learning, has human-shaped hands, exclamation mark, round eyes. And so here's all of this background knowledge, really the skill of inference, right? This child's inferring this from an image and building new ideas and asking questions. We take this image study to a digital context, right, and invite kids to look at an image online and use some type of annotation tool to do the exact same thing. Non-technology, we use Post-its. With technology, we use an annotation tool. Again, going back and looking at those critical comprehension skills, right? Inserting yourself in the text. This is very dangerous. I won't want to be in it. Asking questions, is this Florida? At the bottom, this reminds me of Hurricane Sandy, connecting to background knowledge. And so we look for opportunities to build thinking in whatever context we're using, and giving kids new tools to add on to that thinking, because we know that our learners all have diverse learning styles, right? And that finding as many entry points is a big piece of that. Quickly, we're going to this infographic piece as well. Here's a snapshot of a lesson that we did with third grade that was about to launch an inquiry into climate change. And so we looked at this data. Here's what Earth looked like temperature-wise in 1900. We juxtaposed that image with this image.
Wow.
From 2010. And so that quick, you know, take a look at this, now take a look at this. All of a sudden you have info, right? You can infer, you can ask questions, you can really start thinking about it. We then took a collection of media pieces, infographics, blog posts, images, YouTube videos, and archived them for kids on a Padlet page so they could start inquiring. We then did an explicit instructional lesson on how you view a short video clip to learn. You know, going through those pieces and processes, what do you need to do in order to think about this? And taught kids how to take sketch notes, right? How to combine this visual piece, drawing and writing together, to annotate your thinking. And so along the way, as we watched this video, we paused it, right? We had kids turn and talk just like they would with a piece of print text. We had kids go back, reread the video by rewinding it and starting again, right? And then students took these images they created, crowdsourced their notes, and shared them with the class. And so these sketch notes that kids created became their own infographics that they could use to remember the information, as well as to archive and annotate some of their thinking to build for their future investigation. So lots of ways to think about this media piece and this visual as we go about introducing it to students, and that explicit instruction piece. You know, if we want kids to do it well, we have to teach them how to do it.
I love what you're doing, because this is my passion. This is the attaching visual to the text. And I think humans think in story. You know, and as we read stories, I read stories to my 9-year-old at night, and how he's reading his own stories. We're asking students to build images in their mind, right? To think of the story. And now I just think that piece of, let's translate that now onto the screen. Let's translate that onto paper. Let's translate that into a video. And, you know, taking the text first. And what does that mean to you? What are the visuals that means to you? I think that could lead in really well to the video we want to show, don't you think?
Absolutely. Let me pull that up.
So, you know, we've talked a lot about our classrooms. You showed some excellent examples there. Here is a great example of my classroom.
All right.
In our 21st century world, students have almost unlimited accessibility to mobile devices and are creating their own media, mostly unsupervised or untaught, a phenomenon not witnessed in past generations. For example, a quick YouTube search yields a plethora of content created by young people. A visit to Ferguson, Missouri includes eyewitness video, which shaped the perceptions of viewers. Because current media messages are shaped through blogging, eyewitness video accounts, or Twitter feeds, I believe we have a responsibility to help educate our students on this new media flow, the information in their everyday lives. As educators, we need to teach not only the traditional literacy skills students need to succeed, but also the critical thinking skills that allow students to not only consume, but create digital content. I start by having my students conduct interviews with experts. An expert can be anyone with knowledge, from a friend who bags groceries, a dad who bakes a birthday cake, a teacher at the school, to an elected official. Everyone is an expert on something. In preparation for the interview, students use the inquiry process to narrow their topics and develop questions. These are skills teachers have always taught and are likely familiar. Students will research, take notes, use graphic organizers. They will confer and collaborate with each other, developing a process of preparation which will lead them to success and away from a question and answer in the interview to more of a conversation, allowing students to gain valuable information during their projects. It is also important to teach the technical skills necessary for success. A successful video leverages elements such as light, sound, and clear visuals to gain and maintain the attention of their audience and to portray the message. This topic in the iTunes U course will help students learn the most basic elements and techniques of what's important to capture a video interview. After the interviews, students publish their work to the web, allowing not only their peers, but a global audience to critically analyze their work, thus completing the circle of media literacy. Through the creation and publishing process, students and educators share, teach, and learn from each other, and engagement, accountability, and motivation contribute to a community experience that expands their knowledge of communication in our global society. I firmly believe all educators have the responsibility to incorporate the importance of media literacy education at all levels, in all subjects. Current technology offers an easy and accessible means for our students to learn these literacy lessons through creation. And in our participatory world, we will ultimately offer our students an authentic learning experience.
I think that kind of delves deep into really what's going on in my classroom. I know we're kind of coming up on time a little bit. There's a couple of things, Kristin, I wanted to make sure that I shared with our audience today before we leave, and I know you have some other thoughts as well. There is, I would like our audience to have a takeaway, okay? Something that my class has really loved doing, and then a project that has really permeated the country and the world in some cases with our network. And so I would like to share that if we could before we wrap today, and that is a really unique project, a multi-touch book that I created a couple of years ago, and it's called 6 Word Stories Using 6 Unique Camera Shots. It's enhancing our writing through multimedia. And so this is a free book you can download on iTunes U. We will also tweet out the link later. And it's a 20-page book or so. It can take a couple of days. It could take a week if you wanted. I've had some classes do it in a 45-minute period. And what's great about it is that it doesn't matter the device you have. It can be any kind of camera. You can use still photos, you can use video clips, but it talks about students writing a 6-word story based on Ernest Hemingway, just traditional educational value in writing, really focusing students on being clear and concise and using the most important words in their Snapchat, Twitter society. And this was the famous Ernest Hemingway for sale baby shoes never worn. He was challenged back by friends in the 20s, like, you can't write a novel or a story in 6 words, and he said, I bet I can. And it turned out to be one of his most popular and successful stories. And even just looking at this image, what I love about it is that it's blurry in some areas. It shows these shoes that are, one's on top of the other, and the shoelaces are tied, but yet they're for sale because they were never worn. And yet it suggests that, wait, it looks like they might have been kicked off. And, it's very gray and it's very dark, but yet the blue is very stark. There's sadness in that. And so we talked about these kinds of elements in a visual, and I asked my students to create their own story using color and lighting and 6 words about them. And I have one student video to show as an example that took this entire lesson from this book, and he blew it out of the water, where most kids really wanted to go to a happy place. Keith, who created this video, kind of went to a dark place. And there's a whole backstory behind it that I hopefully will share at South by Southwest. But I would like to share this video before we leave today. It's really short, but it's very powerful, and it's a great example from the book.
Hold on just a sec. All right, can you... No.
Yeah. Can't see it. Kristin?
Hold on. Let me try again.
Couldn't see it there.
That's okay. Let me try again.
Okay.
Just a sec.
No problem.
There you go. Let's go this way.
We had it up there for a second. There we go.
Can you see it now?
Now we're on screen sharing.
Hold on.
Back to the keynote. We're on your desktop now. Yeah, now it's popped up. Cool. You just think about the intention behind where you place the words and the thought process behind creating the bricks. Just a quick backstory. He wanted to use dominoes. Didn't look good on camera. He used bricks. There's so many examples in that really created deep thinking. And so we'll tweet out that book if others are interested.
Yeah, and I think that that brings it back to this creation piece, right? Kids entering Don's classroom didn't know what a 6-word story was, right? They didn't have background knowledge for that piece, but we find those moments to introduce, to create, to craft new learning for kids. And as we think about it, it's not just about teaching film. It's not this piece about teaching infographics or how to use social media or posting a blog, but it's more kaleidoscopic in nature. And it goes to that piece of teaching kids how to read the world, right? I mean, you're reading your text, you're reading billboards, driving down the highway, but you're also reading information online. And it's that piece about being a critical thinker, being a global citizen, going a little bit deeper with where you are, and finding opportunities to connect. It's not one input, it's many inputs. It's not one outcome, it's many outcomes. And so I think as we head out today, we hope that this is something that you're continuing to think about. We've got a number of resources, as Don shared, that he has his 6-word story book available for you. You can see that right up here at the top left, but both Don and I have free books on the iTunes store, mine on digital discourse and math, something different than what we've talked about today, but those are available for free download and give a bunch of student examples and unveil a little bit more about our thinking behind these practices. And then we also have a couple of free iTunes U courses. You can see those at the bottom there. Talking not only about this media piece, but how we can use student curiosity and inquiry to foster that passion piece, right? That reading the world, that being a visualizer, an inferrer, a summarizer in all that we do. And if you check out the website at the top right, we have a Padlet page that we've created, and we'll make sure to tweet that out after the session today. But that has some of our favorite resources, books that we're reading that are informing our thinking, blog posts or articles that we've shared with the world, links to some of the videos that you've seen today. And so we'll make sure to share that on Twitter. But know that there's a number of resources for follow-up, and also know that Don and I are always available, whether it be online or via email. We're happy to keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
Final thoughts, Don?
This was awesome. I loved it. I hope our audience got something from it. It's a conversation I could go on all day about. And like you said, I'm always available. So find me on Twitter, email me, whatever. We'll get in touch. Let's connect.
Awesome. I'd like to thank my friend Don Goble for joining me today in this awesomeness. Everybody stay tuned for the Ed Collab because it's continuing all day. I can't wait to log on with the next session, so be sure to check it out. And as Don said, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you have a great Saturday and keep on learning. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for joining session 1. Thanks, Kristin and Don. I know I've learned a lot from Kristin and Don today. Coming up in session 2, we have, hold on, all these great sessions. So if you have enjoyed this free workshop, please consider donating to the Book Love Foundation, which the link can be found at gathering.theeducationcollaborative.com, which is where you'll also be able to find an archive of all the sessions today. Thank you, and enjoy your next session.